about a revelation, and to be honest, I've seen it before, but admitted from a former aide at Number 10, talking about the fact that the government are frustrated that when it comes to knife crime, judges are not using the powers they have to send someone convicted of possessing a knife for the second time. They even get the benefit of the doubt the first time. The second time, to go straight to jail for a minimum term, both for under 16s and for adults at different levels. And I know all about this law because I helped introduce it. And unfortunately, it's been consistent. The courts don't like being told what to do, even if it's Parliament, who I thought in this country was sovereign. How do we square that circle? 0344 499 1000. What would you do? And is jail the answer? You can tweet me at Nick Dubois or at talkTV. Let's talk to Norman Brennan. Very grateful for you joining us, former police officer and a specialist on knife crime. Norman, welcome.
Yeah, good afternoon, Nick.
I think I've summarised it pretty accurately there. The courts are not sending those who they have been asked to send to jail by government under the mandatory laws brought in 2015. Truth is, there is a little cop-out in British law that allows them not to send everyone to jail, but that cop-out is meant to be used rarely and in extreme circumstances. What do you make of the fact that judges are not sending people to jail when they've been told to by Parliament, Norman?
Well, you're right, unless there's mandatory sentencing, which means that a sentence has to be given no matter what the circumstances are. I'm afraid that magistrates and judges will use loopholes, as they did with the 3 strikes and you're out for burglary about 15 years ago. With all due respect, Nick, I will disagree with you. You carry a knife on the streets of Britain in a public place without lawful authority or reasonable excuse, you go to prison. You go to prison straight away.
Oh, no, I agree, by the way. And first time, I agree. But it was the Liberal Democrats who were in coalition who refused to back that. And the only way to make it law was to go for second time. Yeah,
and your other subject at the moment is politicians. They are so disenfranchised with the British public that they are detached from the reality of knife crime on the streets of Britain. I see the devastation of knife crime. I've been the victim of knife crime, and I've stopped and searched hundreds of predominantly young men in London and seized knives off them. Every knife is a potential murder weapon. And when you think about it, look how many parents are currently planning funerals rather than bright futures for their children. If you carry a gun in a public place, or if you carry a gun and you're caught with it, there are mandatory sentences of a minimum of 5 years. Yet if you carry a knife, you're more likely to get a fine or a community service, but each one of those knives are potential murder weapons, and you're more likely to be stabbed to death 3 times more than...
Norman, just on a question of clarity here. The law requires that the judges issue a mandatory custodial sentence, a minimum of 6 months for an adult, minimum of 4 months for a young offender, in the event, sadly, but this is the law, that they are found guilty for a second offence. It exists, but it has this caveat that even the gun law has, that says if it is in the interests of justice to do so, which means there should be rare exceptions. This is the point. The judges are saying 1 in 3 that come before them who should go to jail, we're not sending to jail. That's the problem. Why are the courts, if you like, taking this lenient view, in your view?
Because courts are more like social workers than independent arbiters of the criminal justice system. Victims of crime are incidental to the criminal justice system. The primary concern of our courts, social services, probation, anyone to do with law and order, it's the offender where they actually spend all the time, energy and effort on. As a result of that, victims' lives are left devastated. You've got people that are maimed by knives, yet the offenders, if they're actually caught, just walk out of court. It's a joke, and it's not a funny joke. 37,000 knives or blunt or bladed weapons were seized by the police in the past 3 years. We've hardly got any police on the streets. It's gone up 34% since 2001, 2002. We have got a knife crime epidemic. 2 years ago on the streets of London, we had the highest number of child homicides on the record. It was 30. 27 were stabbed to death, 2 were shot to death, and 1 was killed in an arson. I don't know how serious an epidemic needs to get unless we just accept that nothing will ever change, that this government and our criminal justice system start giving out deterrent sentences. If you tell someone you're going to go to prison for 5 years, Nick, I can promise you this: within a year or so, knife crime will dramatically drop.
I think we're in danger of being in violent agreement here, Norman. What I'd like to do, if it's OK with you on the line, we've got a caller in who was a victim of knife crime. That's Tony in Lancashire. Hello, Tony.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, many years ago, I was only like between 13 and 14, playing out with my friends on some school ground. It's called St Peter's School Ground, it were, in Lancashire, right? It was many years ago. I'm like 50 now, mate. And I'm like out at blue, this bloke just come out at blue, held a knife to my neck. I was absolutely fine. I didn't know how to bloody get away from the person. In fact, I think it should be longer, 10 to 15 years. If you're carrying a knife, you're intended only to use that knife for certain bloody whatever they're planning on doing, killing or stabbing. That's all the intentions are, and I think they should go bloody down. OK, listen, Tony, I can understand your anger, I can understand your anger, I can understand your concern on that, and I think he was 13 or 14-year-olds. This is overlooked, actually, isn't it, Norman? And we will take another call, by the way, with a different point of view. But this is overlooked, isn't it? That we've got youngsters who are being victims, as well as young people who are going out carrying knives. Yeah,
well, you carry a knife for criminal offences, to carry out criminal offences, protecting your turf. There's 4,000 gangs in Britain now, 200 are in London. Many of these carry knives, and knives truly destroy lives. One of the reasons I have a passion is when I was a serving police officer in the early hours of the morning, I was the area car driver in Chelsea, and I tried to arrest with some colleagues from the Met, the burglar. He burgled 3 houses with a knife, which means it's the most serious one. Had he been disturbed, he possibly would have killed them. What did happen? He nearly killed me. He stabbed me in the chest when I tried to arrest him. So if anybody tells me that I don't know the devastation of knife crime, I've never recovered from it. Hence, I'm speaking to you now on a Sunday afternoon about it. Knives truly destroy lives. It destroys many police officers' lives. Many police officers are stabbed, and they're the ones that are supposed to keep the streets safe. And if the police don't feel safe, is it hardly surprising the victims of crime in the public don't when it comes to knife crime?
Norman, I've also always believed that whilst passionately you should be sent to jail for carrying a knife, because in my view, to kill someone with a knife, you have to first carry a knife. And if you can take those knives off people, you're going to make a major step to hopefully reducing the incidence of knife crime. But I also believe that jail alone, you won't effectively arrest and sentence your way out of this problem. Where do you stand on what needs to be done to help discourage people? Is it about cutting the heads off gangs, or is it education? What programmes need to be rolled out across the country?
Well, 20 years ago, Nick, as a serving police officer, I held a press conference in London. The parents of children that had been stabbed to death in a school, Damilola Taylor's father, many others actually come along. And I predicted a crisis, an epidemic in knife crime. He had a double-page spread in every national newspaper. And what I said is this: we need mandatory sentencing, 5 years for an adult, 3 years for a juvenile. We need mass stop and search. Yes, it's controversial, but it saves lives, and it's what the families want the police to do that have had a child murdered. We need a mass education programme. We want personal and parental responsibility. We also need mentors. We need to get the churches involved. We need fathers to play a better part in their children's life. Too many fathers in London and other parts of the country have it on their toes once they leave children behind, playing no part. And mum is often left, and it's not down to single mums. I'm not having a pop at them. I'm telling you the reality of dealing with it as a police officer, is that often there's 3 or 4 kids and mum is only too pleased for the elder one to go out and play with his
And a father figure matters. That's the reality about this, whether under whatever circumstances, and many people do actually fail to recognise some of the validity of that point and go all PC on me. Look, if you're okay, Noor, I'd like to take another call. We've got Mick in the Isle of Wight, who I believe, Mick, welcome. You don't believe we should increase sentences for knife crime?
Well, no, I never actually said that.
Okay, fair enough.
Two points I'd like to make, if I can. First of all, people in prison. What prisons are you going to put them in? Because...
Build more. Listen, just build more. We have to build more. We can't use that as an excuse to leave violent people on the streets.
You look at the numbers of how many people were in prison per 1,000 60 years ago.
Yeah.
I was looking for the figures.
Yep.
Got me in front of me, but the numbers are higher now. And also, there's another point, if I can...
No, sorry, the only reason I'm stopping you, Mick, is your line's breaking up, and I think we're missing really important figures that you're putting out there. So I'm going to just...
Is that any better?
Well, try again and repeat what you were saying. You were looking at some figures per head of population for the prison population.
You look at what it was 60 years ago compared to what it is today, and there were more people in prison per 1,000 than what they were, say, 50, 60, 70 years ago. The other point I'd like to make, if I may...
Yeah, you go ahead.
You still with me?
Yes, got you. Go ahead.
Look at who is carrying the knives and using them. Is it Chinese people? No, it's not. Is it Indian people? No, it's not. Is it white people? No, it's not.
Yes, it is. No, yes, it is. Honestly, no, you're wrong.
Black people.
No, you're wrong. It's actually... No, you are. What I'm saying is, if you're trying to say that it's all black people who cause knife crime, I'm sorry, that would be the wrong thing to say, because there are white parents and white kids, white parents who are victims, white parents' kids who stab people, just as there are black people and other ethnicities. That's just the bottom line, and the stats point to that.
I'm looking at tendencies.
Let's bring Norman in.
I'm not looking at absolute.
Let's bring Norman in.
Look, if we're talking about London and we're talking about stats, about 70% of the crime are committed by young black males. But let's put that colour aside just for the moment, and let's deal with the real issue. Each knife that is carried is a potential killer. And in relation to people that go to prison, Nick, and your caller there are two types of people that go to prison. One where the crime is so serious, like a murder, a rape, an armed robbery, where they're dangerous and it's only right they're sent to prison, even if it's their first offence. The second type of person that is sent to prison are those that have exhausted about 12 alternatives, from a caution right up to a suspended sentence. So if they're the two types of people that are in prison, Nick, how can we have too many people in prison if the magistrates and judges are sending people to prison for the right reasons? It's all a myth, and then we make an excuse about we haven't got enough prison places.
But the answer is to build prisons. Then you're violently agreeing with me again, Norman, here, because we have to build them. Otherwise, look, that is the brutal reality, isn't it?
It is. We don't actually invest in rehabilitation. Many children and young offenders and young adults that go to prison are sent to prison for a relatively short period of time. It's normally a respite from criminality. But the other answer to what we're talking about now is that when people are released onto the streets of Britain, that is the open university of crime. And many criminals that I put away, or most criminals I put away, have got very new tricks to learn. When they're in prison, they're incarcerated, they're taken off of the streets. The public are protected, the victims are reassured, and the public feels safe. So we cannot keep making excuses of why we don't send dangerous...
But who is making the excuses?
I think it's the judiciary. It's got to be. The government really are in power to enforce legislation. You and I both know that there is statute law right across the books. You GBH somebody with a knife, for example, it's attempt murder, or GBH with intent. The maximum penalty is life imprisonment. They're walking out the streets in months, a year or two. The victims are left distraught, maimed often, and many parents are burying their kids instead of giving them a future. That is how... problem is.
Norman, fantastic to hear your voice. Just to read this to you, Mr. Brennan talks sense, absolute legend. And then rather mysteriously, Darren from Bristol says, what the hell is Nick on about nothing? And I'm not quite sure what we've disagreed on, but there you go. Norman Brennan, former police officer on knife crime. Darren, you're going to have to explain yourself there, because I think you're actually thinking, I don't believe people need to go to prison, even though I was the MP who brought the law in that said people need to go to prison.